Hey y'all, back again with Nathaniel.
Hello again. Hello.
Y'all are tired of us, I know.
No, I think they love us. We're going to go syndicate soon. We're probably going to have our own Netflix show.
I'm not opposed to that. I always wanted to be famous.
You are famous.
Thanks. All right, so my next question for you is, what if I have gaps in my employment?
Mm-hmm. So gaps of employment, it's not necessarily detrimental having a gap of employment, but having a long gap could be a concern. I will start by saying that if somebody is on maternity leave, there's more flexibility with someone who's on maternity leave and resuming and going back to work. If you've had a gap of employment because you've been furloughed, or if you've experienced something with COVID-19 and now you have a significant gap of employment, we do have to bridge that gap. So here's the general rule of thumb. There are different types of loan programs out there. So I'm going to talk about the qualified mortgage program because everybody wants lower interest rates, Jay, right? They want to be at 3% or lower, or just those nicer lower rates. Those are government side lending loans. There's different categories there. So generally when you're dealing with FHA, Federal Housing Administration loans, FHA would like for you, the consumer, to have a full 2-year history of employment. Now, if you had a little bit of a gap, that's okay. We can go to the period of time before the gap. We can go back 10 years, 11 years, 15 years. We can go back as far as we had to, but we have to be able to tie in that in your field, what you've done, you have a consistent 2-year history of employment. So hypothetically, if 4 years ago, I worked consistently for 2 years working at Publix, and recently I had to take a significant gap of employment because I had to take care of my aging parent, my mom or my dad. Now I'm going back to work. One, you've got to be back to work with either a salary position or a wage earner position where you are full-time. The key is that you're full-time. Okay. If you're part-time and you had a gap of employment, you have to then, being part-time, you have to have a full 2-year consistent period for that. However, if you go back to being full-time salaried or full-time wage earner, if you're commission or self-employed, it's a much different scenario. So if you're full-time salaried or a wage earner and you have 40 hours or 36 plus hours a week, we would want you to have been on employment for a minimum of 30 days. Now, if you had that gap, Jay, we're going to go back to the period of time before your gap and piece in that consistent 2-year history. That's on an FHA loan. Conventional financing does offer a little bit more flexibility, and depending on the reason of the gap, and if you are going back to full-time employment, again, salaried or wage earner, there's a very good probability that we may not necessarily have to piece in 2 years, but that depends on profile to profile.
Okay.
Now, if you're self-employed, it's a little more challenging. Self-employed, you could have flexibility there. I could be self-employed for 3 years, but in the last 6 months, maybe I wasn't, or 2-3 months, maybe I had a setback. Well, as long as your 2 full tax filing years, if we have that, and if we get a recent profit and loss statement prepared by you or your accountant, shows that in the most recent period of time, there is not a significant decline in your income from the past 2 years, the gap wouldn't really matter. Okay. It only matters if your earnings have declined with your gap. So technically there could be maybe a little more flexibility if you're commission and self-employed, depending on the math. So that just requires more of a forensic study on looking at your paperwork more carefully.
Okay, thank you again, Nathaniel.
You are welcome. What do we do with all this? And by the way, if anybody has any questions, you know they can always get a hold of either myself or Jay. We'd love to talk to you about that.
Yes, we would love to talk with you.
Absolutely.